Good evening, Psych 410 students. Here in Central Ohio, it's the evening when I'm making this video. This is a short video on one development in clinical psychology. It has to do with graduate school training, and in particular differences between the Ph.D. and the PsyD, Advanced Graduate Training Degrees, for people who want to go into clinical psychology. You read in Module 3 in Chapter 15 about the Boulder model. The Boulder model started in about 1950 after a meeting in 1949 where universities created graduate training programs that produced the Ph.D. And that was not new, producing the Ph.D., but for clinical graduate students, the Boulder model meant there was an emphasis on research training. And this is true to today, where graduate students in Ph.D. programs in clinical psychology are usually required to complete a pretty extensive Ph.D. dissertation. So that's a research project that's in some area of clinical psychology. So, for example, to maybe do a research study testing the efficacy of a social anxiety treatment, and maybe perhaps comparing that to a treatment control condition of some sort. These can be pretty lengthy research projects and result in publications often for students. The Boulder model is a scientist-practitioner model. You also might remember reading in that same module in Chapter 15 about the Vail model. The Vail model came along in 1973. Other psychologists got together in Vail, Colorado, and essentially said graduate students shouldn't need to do as much research. Their training should focus more on getting supervision and on doing clinical practice. And the importance of research training and doing research and understanding research is less emphasized. Research was not seen as important for the PsyD degree, and this tends to be true today. As part of this video, I wanted to announce that in Notebowl, in the Documents tab, I'm going to post 2 documents that are on this topic, the topic of Ph.D. programs and their similarities and differences with PsyD programs. One of those documents was generated by the Psychology Department in 2011. It's called the Clinical Grad School Guide. I'm going to post that in Notebowl. I'm also going to post a published article on PsyD and Ph.D. program similarities and differences by Norcross, Ellis, and Sayet, published in 2010. This is for those of you who might be interested in looking at those resources. So, for example, this may be very important for some of our students, for Denison Psych majors, right? If you're interested in going on to get some graduate training in psychology because you want to help people, because you want to be a therapist, for example, or a counselor, you might consider the Ph.D. or the PsyD degree, and you'd like to know more about what's involved in those degrees. I just said something about differences in the requirement for research, and you may want to know about some other things too, and those documents may be very helpful. That information in those 2 documents would not be for a quiz or the final exam. However, this issue of clinical training for the Ph.D. or the PsyD is highly relevant to everyone, not just relevant to our students or to you, because they or you might be interested in what kind of graduate training would I like to be involved in. But this is also important because it can be crucial when it comes to having anyone who's struggling with mental illness selecting a professional to help them. Right? So one of the differences between a person trained with a Ph.D. and with a PsyD, and this is a generalization. It's like a rule, and there are exceptions to rules. But in general, a person with a Ph.D. will be better able to evaluate clinical research in an attempt to understand what are the best ways to treat clients. And that would be less true for people who get graduate training and have other kinds of degrees. This raises lots and lots of questions, but everybody should be aware that if you know someone who's seeking some help with a mental health issue, we would all want that person to be treated effectively. And I would submit that it's useful to pay attention to the ongoing research in clinical psychology in order to know what would be most effective. So this is a highly relevant issue, right? People will often ask me, oh, I have a friend or a relative who has X problem, and, how can I find help for them? So the training of a mental health professional is very important. I just will leave you with one other thought here, and if you do or if you don't, look at those two documents that I'm going to post on Notebowl, that one of the differences between Ph.D. and PsyD programs has to do with money. There are several differences that have to do with money. I'll just mention one of them. Ph.D. programs at universities tend to run on money that's generated by the faculty who work there who write grants to conduct clinical research. The grants are often funded by taxpayer money and awarded through sponsors like the NIH or NSF or other granting agencies you've probably heard the names of. Ph.D. graduate programs are largely funded by grant money that psychology faculty win. That money is used to support the training of graduate students. It's used to pay bills. It's used to pay faculty, and it often supports tuition, so that the cost of going to a Ph.D. graduate program in clinical psychology tends to be less than for a PsyD program. PsyD programs tend to, and again, this is like a rule and there are exceptions, but PsyD programs tend to run more like businesses. They admit a lot of students relative to PhD programs, charge a full tuition, which probably usually is not as much as, say, going to Denison, but it's many thousands of dollars. And it's tuition money from PsyD students that supports the programs. Okay? So PhD programs are often supported by grant money, and PsyD programs are supported by the tuition that students pay. I would encourage you to look at these documents that I'm posting on Blackboard. Students find them to be very helpful. I've been doing this for a long time, and I think it's a good service to do as part of our History and Systems class. Check it out if you have a chance, or at least don't forget that those are there and you can look into them later when you have some time. All right, everybody, have a good night. I hope you're safe and well out there. Bye.